You're listening to the All Things Data Podcast, the show that brings you insights and informed conversation around today's ever-advancing knowledge economy. In the spirit of Daniel Kahneman, Peter Diamandis, and Google Moonshots, All Things Data brings together leading data scientists, technologists, business model experts, and futurists to discuss how to utilize, harness, and deploy data science, data-driven strategies, and enable digital transformation. Your hosts are Dan Yarmaluk, Dr. Manjeet Reghe, and Thomas Marlowe.
Hi, I'm Tom Marlowe here with Dan Yarmaluk, and we have with us two incredible guests who I'll introduce in just a moment here. These days, education is a pretty hot topic with kids in schools, learning remotely, and hybrid versions of these models proliferating. On top of the rapid acceleration of technologies and their adoption for all levels of learning, the educational app space is predicted to grow and grow over the next several years, approaching a market size, I want to say around 50 billion from the last time that I checked, which is pretty incredible. Now, no doubt this is an interesting space. As the space grows and as more kids and adults are being exposed to new forms of learning, engagement becomes a central and critical theme. So today, kind of in that vein, we have two guests to talk about engagement, game-based learning, and to a certain extent, gamification. So first we have Dr. Elizabeth Owen, who is the founder and chief data scientist of Learning Data Discovery, where she focuses on optimizing data-driven design of immersive learning systems through integrated machine learning. And more recently, she was a data science consultant at Google and headed the analytics platform for adaptive game-based learning systems as director of learning data science at Age of Learning. We also have Dr. KP Tai, who is the director of learning sciences and learning analytics at Age of Learning, which is an educational company in Los Angeles. You might know them from their product ABC Mouse, where they develop high quality learning games for children. Their mission is to help children everywhere build strong foundations for academic success. So these are incredible backgrounds, and there's even more impressive pieces that I'm overlooking that can be found in our show notes as well. So with that, Liz, KP, great to have you with us.
Thanks for having us.
Thanks for having us. It's a pleasure.
Yeah, so, I think maybe a good place to start from our previous conversations is to take a look at the idea of game-based learning and, what is a very kind of buzzword in gamification. Maybe can we talk about what the differences between those two are?
Sure, I can jump in on that. So I think, Tom, just to speak to your introduction a little with the reason why these things are relevant, why we're even talking about game-based learning and gamification is because, especially now in the distance learning climate, engagement is more important than ever because there literally aren't teachers who are able to be present in a class full of kids for the most part. And we're really looking at a lot of informal learning environments in the sense that kids are home and they have technology or, students of any age. And to get them to do the thing you want them to do, it's even more important for it to be engaging, because in the classroom, it really just needs to be like this much more interesting than the textbook or the teacher, right? But when you're at home, in informal learning environments, there's a lot of options. And
there's so many distractions.
Yes,
I've got two kids, and this hits home so much because keeping them tasked or engaged on what they're doing at the house is It can be brutal.
Yeah, really difficult, right?
Can I ask a question on that, guys? Like with regards to engagement and learning, do you have, just because this is a real level set, do you have any, I don't know, some information, some anecdotes, what your findings or beliefs are with regards to kids learning and what engagement actually means to learning as opposed to just, sitting back in a testing type of environment? I don't know if I'm articulating it correctly. I'm just, the engagement part, that we say that, but what does that really mean with learning and learning over a lifetime?
Yeah. I think an important concept to bring up here is learner variability, right? Like kids are inherently different. Every learner is different. There's no such thing as an average student. So when you engage children, it really depends on what the child is their prior knowledge, their interest, right? All the different things that are affecting their social, emotional, cognitive, physical growth, right? And so, it opens up a wide range of issues here where there's, like Liz said, right? Right now with the current situation where kids are learning at home, the where learning takes place varies. But then there's also, like, we know that kids can come to school hungry. They must map out safe paths to walk, to their walk from home to school. And some children are bored because of the traditional methods of instruction just don't engage them or meet their needs. So it also has to do with how well they're learning alongside their classmates, right? If everyone is supposed to be learning the same thing in a classroom setting. So we really need to be able to think about how to reach every learner in every classroom, in every situation, and meet their potential as they move through school and beyond.
That's interesting. As you describe that, my first thought when you say learner variability is, okay, each kid has a different personality, a different way that they take on learning. But to your point, I think it also includes their environment and what's going on in their life, and those things that can have equal amounts of impact on how they intake the knowledge that is being delivered to them.
Yeah, definitely. I think context really matters, and there's based in sort of research and learning sciences, there's this concept of interest-driven learning, which has some roots in constructivism, which basically the child engages in and helps construct their own context for learning. And games can provide a really positive way to do that. Inquiry-driven learning, too, is where the learner kind of explores their own path through the learning space and interacts with things as it feels relevant to them and explores experiences. And that's part of what game-based learning can support. And we know from a lot of decades of educational research that structured play is a natural learning catalyst. So Vygotsky, way back, one of the earliest educational psychologists, he really focused on, and even later prominent folks like Piaget. Really, it's structured play is natural learning. So there's talk of something called the proximal zone of development, the ZPD, zone of proximal development.
Okay.
Potato, right? But
Sure.
A ZPD really is where there's a student is connected with a learning task that they are actually engaged in, and that there's a zone where things are not too challenging and not too easy. So there's just enough challenge to keep the interest level, but there's not so much challenge that it's makes it frustrating and making the player or the student want to quit. And I think games are really a natural environment for embodying that principle, especially well-designed games that allow for user customization and personalization during play. And so those are just some things we know in learning sciences about engagement.
Yeah, because you got to imagine in some of the development of modern, say, like video games, I'm sure there is tons of R&D spent on that engagement piece.
Yes,
and
absolutely.
Do you see the same amount of research and development going in on the educational side, or is it lagging, or maybe can it piggyback on that?
Well, I'll pass it to KP in a sec if she wants to run with it. I just want to say that is exactly, you hit the nail on the head, that is exactly what makes educational game design really difficult. Because you are starting with, things that you want to teach and probably assess during play, because you can't have a personalized experience unless you know how the player is doing, unless you assess where they are and what they're learning as they go, while at the same time providing a fun experience. Because if it's not fun, students are not going to play. So if students don't engage with it, they're not going to learn anything. So, that sweet spot in between, engagement and fun and learning content and assessments is a really difficult space. It's a very difficult space, and it's hard to do well.
Yeah, it gets at the, finish that, Liz.
Please go ahead.
Oh no, it gets at that difference that I think Tom was asking earlier, the gamification versus game-based learning, right? Gamification is used to optimize engagement. Like it uses game elements as a reward for completing a task, right? Think points, badges, leaderboards, and incentives. Game-based learning is different. It optimizes learning while providing playful engagement. So the idea is that it and you get some of this from Liz already, that game-based learning fully integrates the game mechanics with the learning content. So the game itself is the training. So what we're talking about here is the latter.
Yeah, I mean, one classic example of gamification in math is a really early game. That's kind of, gamification is kind of chocolate-covered broccoli. And there's not a bad, it's not bad inherently. It just, I think there's a time and a place for it. So like Math Blaster is a good example where Math Blaster is a game in which you're in a spaceship and math problems pop up on the dashboard in front of you. And then the answers to the math problem come floating at you from space and you have to shoot the right answer. So
I remember playing this game.
Yeah, and look, I think that was actually, I think Math Blaster paved the way for a lot of really high quality games later on. So I'm not knocking it. Like Math Blaster had big, yeah.
I thought it was a lot of fun, but that's probably fun relative to the alternative.
Yeah, and so that's an example of gamification. It's really just, it's a math worksheet that you shoot the answers.
Right.
Which is fine. It's okay. I just think, when we're talking about intrinsic motivation, and you have something where game mechanics are directly aligned with the thing you're trying to teach. So one example is SimCity EDU, which was a mod of SimCity that when I was at Glass Lab at EA Games up in Redwood City, we worked on. And everything you did as part of the core game experience in SimCity EDU, like creating housing and creating energy plants and creating jobs, and those are specific things that you do as part of the city building experience. They were directly connected with the game objective, which was to limit and reduce pollution. So in this sense, there was, the goal of the game was aligned with, educational content, and the mechanics directly impacted that in a really intrinsic way that was, in itself, a really natural context for learning, if that makes any sense.
Yeah.
Can I ask a question about, again, another level set question is like, when we say engagement is high, I mean, we're making it synonymous with game. I mean, I don't know. To me, I think maybe the word gamification and game-based play or project-based work. It's like, I don't know if it kind of depreciates the value of what we're saying here, because we got to say that we're just about to leap off this 1950s factory educational system, right? But how do they learn in the past? I used to hear things like they learn through stories, ancient tombs and all these things. So, I mean, is it really, I see us going back to that in a way through stories and drawings and paintings electronically, and kind of moving off this factory so how do we learn? How do kids learn? How do we keep them? Like, is it a game or is it interest? I wonder if you could comment on that stuff.
I think a game is one way to capture interest, but there are a lot of ways to engage students in learning beyond games. I mean, it's really an ecosystem. Sorry, Katie, please go ahead.
Oh, I absolutely agree with that. I would add to that we can certainly align the science of how kids learn with the power of games, kind of combining your questions here. So what would engagement look like, right? Like Liz already mentioned, that some of the things that play is powerful for learning. And what's beautiful about game is that it's okay to fail in games. Mm-hmm. And failure is sometimes a requirement for you to succeed in the game, right? So that kind of playful engagement will promote perseverance. That's the behavior you want to see as kids are learning.
Grit.
They're embracing, grit. They embrace challenges, right? They use mistakes to learn. They make discoveries.
Yeah. There's this I'm sorry.
Oh, Liz and I are very much in sync. Like you can tell.
I know, I can tell. Yeah,
we could just finish sentences. What I was gonna say is that like when you think of games, like really well-designed learning games, what it really is it's a series of well-ordered problems that can provide just-in-time information and feedback to support a player's progress. So when useful feedback is provided during the gameplay, which in our case it's going to be the learning process, it's formative. It enables ongoing improvements and enable the games to customize to the player's difficulty level, right? So that you don't go to the next one until you've demonstrated mastery or proficiency on the previous round of the game. So the kind of level of like the scaffolding and feedback is crucial to help kids learn, and that's how you see kids engaged. And then there's also the learning in context, the story-based kind of problem. Right? When you think about how math is taught, like math is notorious for being a subject that's being taught without context. Right, you hear, I think Tom might agree to this, right? Like kids might ask, like, why am I learning this? When do I ever need to apply this in my real life, right? So like understanding the context, like it helps make concepts more meaningful and provide a framework for them to even understand what they should be doing and why with that concept that they're learning. So, and story context is so important, and that's what games can also provide to contextualize the things that they're learning and help them transfer outside of the game.
Yeah, I think those are really important points. And I think right in line with that, as KP said, well-designed games give a series of well-ordered problems with just-in-time information with a low cost of failure. I mean, and when you think about it, failure is inherent in learning from the beginning of human development. I mean, when we think about a child learning to crawl, or learning to walk. And we think about sort of in the school system, summative assessment is highly emphasized, where it's one test, once a year. That's, I mean, especially when I was teaching with NCLB was very, very prominent at that time. But it's a sense of like there's one test, you don't really get the test results back until 3-4 months later. So there's no sense that it's actionable. It's just sort of this gavel that falls like you're a good student, you're a bad student, you're whatever. And when we think about it, that's not really a natural paradigm for learning. So like when you're a baby learning to crawl, you don't just get up on your knees and wobble, take one step, one sort of movement forward and fall on your face and say, oh, that's it.
This one's not a walker.
This one's not a walker. Let's track him into the floor wriggling category or whatever, right?
Right.
So it's a very natural state, and I think that's one thing I love about games is that inherent in the norm of games is that there's a sense of boundary testing to explore an underlying rule system, so that you can really like push boundaries, test limits, and then fail forward. In a way, it's right. About.
It's a great point, Liz, because like, well, I'm dating myself, but 3 lives and the game's over typically, and the fact that you can go back and restart it again, is there's no skin off your back. It's just more time, and that's a totally different. I mean, I just think that this game-based learning, everything you're talking about is learning, versus the educational situation today is assessment. It's assessment, and it's like related to funding. Yeah, and exactly. I just applaud you guys for working on these big problems. I mean, is there a general acceptance that like, okay, we had that summative assessment on that particular day, X person didn't perform because they come from a different situation, right? But could be a perfect person to do some tremendous ultra marathon grit task, but we're not appreciating that because of this type of learning system. I mean, when I think of school, I think of assessment only for my daughter who's in high school. I don't think about her learning at all. She comes back so skeptical, and this is a top private school, not private school, top public high school. And I let her go her way to explore other topics, but it seems to be a task, not to be an interest or games or of interest.
Yeah.
Well, it almost feels like with the assessment-based paradigm, you're kind of saying either somebody has a certain amount of potential or they don't, binary, right?
Yeah.
So it's the end of the year, they didn't figure out math. They're, that this is who they are as far as math goes.
Yeah.
Versus something where you can try and try again and try again. It's basically saying that's accepting that, anyone's got whatever potential they can work for, which honestly feels more like reality.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think, honestly, I've seen things improve in terms of forms of assessment. I think, using technology for process-based assessment and formative assessment. And what formative assessment means is just there's a sense where someone is working on a project or there's even, a small quiz. It can come in a lot of different forms. It can be embedded in a game. That's naturally part of gameplay. But a sense that as kids are learning, there's understanding of progress rather than a summative assessment, which is like at the end of the year, you have this test and you pass or fail. So I think there have been improvements, and I think there have been a lot of efforts in game-based learning too, and just simulation technology use to support that. So I would say it has improved since I was in the classroom. I guess that was 12 years ago. Wow. Time flies, but 10 years ago. But I think pushing these things forward and really applying data science to process data that comes through in immersive learning environments, especially digitally, is, I think, the path forward to helping improve assessment. Because assessment really is a tail that wags the dog in many cases. It's also, data science and assessment, especially formative assessment, is what helps drive personalization and customization in play. And since a teacher won't be always available in this environment right now with distance learning, it's a nice thing to have if you have a learning system that adapts to students.
Yeah, I would add to that there is an increasing recognition that there is a stagnation here in kids' academic achievement, indicated by those assessments that you were talking about, like from standardized national and international assessments that school typically use. So there's that recognition, and there's a lot of effort going toward that. And I think ours is one of the ways that we think would be really critical in getting at that So that plus learner variability, right, via game-based personalization.
Mm-hmm. Are you seeing schools starting to adapt some of these ideas?
Yeah, I would say so.
Yeah, you should talk to Age of Learning's traction with.
Yeah, so perhaps the best numbers to think about when we talk about this is in light of COVID-19, mm-hmm. where, you know, schools first closed, right? We recognized the need to help millions of kids learn at home, and parents were still like really actively trying to keep them learning at home. So we have this school continuity initiative where parents around the US can reach out to their schools for free access to our products. And in terms of the interest, so if we look at the US, there's 89,000 elementary schools. And we saw more than 80,000 of those schools, districts, teachers reached out to us.
No kidding.
And yeah, and we have provided access to our programs. That's over 1 million students.
Wow, those are amazing numbers.
Mm-hmm.
That's very impressive. That's great to hear. That's very encouraging. You know, KP and Liz, I mean, you guys have so much education in this subject, and there's no way to really cover all of this stuff. When you're talking to the average person, what do you want them to consider in your battle or your life's passion in bringing these things to the people? What do you want them to think of so they don't get too nervous about it? You know, what would be your message to those type of people?
I think, just a reminder that play is a natural way to learn. And I think that, look, games are a medium, and a medium can be used for good or bad. We see it in movies, sure. We see it in books, even, Mein Kampf was a book, no form of media is going to be in and of itself a silver bullet. Conscious development of good material and positive experiences is important, which is one reason that I feel passionately about game-based learning, and the positive traits of games applied to education is really a passion project for me. And I think that just creating positive content that way, reminding people, hey, play is a really natural way to do this. And having tools where parents and players themselves, students, have can see their own progress. So there's some transparency into it. So there's visualization of progress in the game. There's tools to help parents understand what their kids are doing. And I think that kind of visibility is really important. And of course, data helps immensely with that in a digital environment.
Mm-hmm. I think there's a general wariness, perhaps, in, there's this humongous growth in learning technology, or what's quote unquote learning technology, right? And how it might transform education. And if we look at historically speaking, like when the radio first came out in the 30s, and film in the 50s, and TV in the 60s and 70s, right? And then you kind of go forward with desktop computing, mobile devices, smartboard, laptops. Like, there's always been this hope that every innovation is going to promise a lot, but they never really produced improved learning outcomes. And so I understand that. Like, there's, but I think times are changing. There's hope. Because what we have now that we didn't have as much before is evidence-based principles from the learning sciences. Like, we know a lot about how kids learn and how to help them learn better. And we are, there's a group that actively works on learning engineering. So it's an approach where you apply evidence-based principles and ideas of how kids learn and combine that with research and with data. So learner-centered research methods and appropriate uses of data to drive iterative improvements in real-world settings. So at Age of Learning, we're one of those groups that engage in that effort. So that's really promising, because I think that's the key here. And of course, like doing this at scale is not at all trivial, right? Like it would require hundreds, if not thousands of people to alter their thinking and practices about learning. But, you know, systematically and thoughtfully taking advantage of the knowledge that we have, and, you know, going about that iterative design in real world setting, like in the many ways that Liz had mentioned also, seems to really be the key here to making it work. So I'm very excited and having a lot of hope.
Yeah.
Do you have a place that you can point people to? Like, is there a society? Is there a country? Do you say like Norway is doing fantastic? They have this investment, been doing it for 10 years. Is there any stuff you can point to?
So I think I just want to also add one last point. I think with helping people be open to games, the reality is your kids are probably playing games anyway, and they're interacting with media constantly. So you might as well have them interact with something that's trying to be responsible.
True story. Yep.
You know,
Liz, when you commented on Tom's question about investment in education is low and video games are high, do you ever see a world where video games and learning, a video game, company like EA can like realize that maybe we can profit from education too, and it can be a great game? Is that ever going through their mind?
I hope so. I hope there's a model where the need for high quality, engaging learning experiences connects with the world of the need of students, right? And that there's, an economic model that supports that. I think right now, with the way the school system is structured, it's difficult. But I think I do have hope. You know, there's been a lot of different ideas around that. I think that moving that forward is going to be a big indicator of whether we can support, game-based learning at scale and really high quality learning experiences at scale. I feel that there is a big potential with large programs like Google Classroom, for example, which really is a distance learning tool. And I'm not currently, on that product or, working with Google. So I'm not saying that out of like an ad. I'm just using it as an example that, if we connect with different platforms in that sense, and that so that kind of provides the distribution channel, and that content is approved, and then, somehow an agreement has come to through those channels with a lot of students connecting with the material, that's a potential opening for this kind of thing. I think it's going to take some creativity to build a sustainable business model around it. But, I think in this climate where the nature of education is changing necessarily, we don't have a choice. We must get creative with what education looks like in this new era we're walking into. I say walking into, the door to the cave has crumbled with rocks, and now we are in the cave. So either we go bang our head on the rocks and what was previously the entrance to the cave, or we turn around and we walk forward and we figure out what is going to work here. And in a way, it's a tremendous opportunity. It's really a tremendous opportunity for different paradigms and methodology, for the use of technology to support new methodology that is really interest-driven, personalized, and engaging. And I think we can do it. I think it's a difficult juncture we are experiencing now, but I do believe that there is hope, and because necessity is the mother of invention. If there was ever a time that we would that we will move this forward and find an answer, it's now.
Well, Liz, explain how this, when I think of ABC Mouse or the things you've created, I think of so much thought given into it. And then at the same time, we want to experiment and scale this. So tell all the gamers out there or video game designers out there what you do with them. They got the beauty, there's this software engineering coding, but what do they need to do to tinker with these things? How do we get to scale?
That's a great question. I think it starts with fundamentals of design and integrating data into design from the beginning. So data and evidence-driven design. So there's something called evidence-centered design, which is a thing that was created by Bod Mislevy and some folks at ETS. And I find those principles really useful, especially in combination with a data mining approach, collecting all data in the system and not being selective about preconceived notions of evidence. So there's a sense in which evidence-centered design, which is saying, okay, I want to teach these things, these mechanics in the game will align to that content, and then give me evidence of learning as students are going. And then we can also collect all the data that's happening, not just those small 1, 2, 3, 4 pieces of evidence in a given activity or time frame, but all of the data. Mouse clicks, interaction with the UI, all the things, right? And then really do some data mining to have a confirmatory, exploratory approach where we say, will we hypothesize that these things would support learning? Do they really? Let's mine the data and then have iterative design from there. So I think it starts with really thinking about what you want to teach, and by the way, all games are learning, whether they have a quote unquote educational objective or not.
Yeah.
When you play Call of Duty, for example, you are learning the mechanics of the game. There's always a FATUI or a first-time user experience in any game. And if the game fails to do that well, the game just...
It doesn't work.
It doesn't work. It plummets. Nobody buys it. Everyone's mad. I'm refraining to using more colloquial terms here, but yeah, I mean, it's essential. So, I think when we're talking about very intentional design around things you want to learn, you want players to learn, then that's a really fundamental part of games, even in the commercial world. And then, collecting evidence of that growth over time as players engage is really key. That takes a sense of evidence-centered design. It also takes a lot of data being collected along the way. So we can explore, okay, here's what we thought would help players. Is it really helping players? And doing some mining to figure out what's really happening here, right? So what are emerging pathways of users? Not necessarily just the ones we thought would happen. So the combination of those is really powerful for scaling. That sort of thing also enables personalization which, by the way, a lot of commercial games do. I believe it's Call of Duty, and I'm being mistaken. I may be thinking of another first-person shooter, but it does actually subtly alter the difficulty of play based on your number of deaths. there is a prominent first-person shooter that does that, and it doesn't tell you it's doing it, right? It does not tell you it's doing it. It does it sort of behind the scenes. So when we say personalization, it's not necessarily like, I need help with a math problem. It's just it's a basic tenet of engagement in a complex environment.
Yeah, and
what you're also hearing.
Oh, go ahead. Oh. Yeah, KP, please.
Yeah, I was just pointing out that what you're also hearing from Liz, that you can't really do it in a vacuum with just game developers. Right, like there's an inherent assumption here that you're going to need a diverse team, right? Like perhaps someone from like curriculum or education that tells what is it that we need to teach. Learning and data scientists like ourselves to think about how do we apply research-based evidence through the design process? How do we collect evidence and draw insights about what works and what doesn't work, and iterate? That's such an important point. Is that we have to iterate. We have to iterate with real kids, and of course. If you're designing for kids specifically, then you would need to make sure the design is actually developmentally appropriate. So then you have to bring in user researchers, design researchers, perhaps even developmental psychologists, right?
So what you're saying is it's a multifaceted challenge.
Yeah.
It's a team sport.
Yeah, there you go.
Yeah, I mean, and it's not just these principles, right? It's like making these principles work in a fast-paced production environment is a big challenge. It's one thing, and that's what I've spent my career doing. I think it's fascinating taking the principles of learning and assessment and engagement and strong curriculum or whatever, right? And actually making that work in a real world production environment has been fascinating You know, working with that a little bit with Google and Age of Learning and EA, it's been really, really, I mean, that's where I really nerd out, is how do we make this work at scale, to your question, you know, Dan. And I think there has to be a sense in which, you know, agile methodology needs to be connected with, in the sense that these principles have to be implemented into practice during a production cycle, where people who are not data scientists and learning scientists can implement these in the design and production process efficiently. And that there also is a culture of data, and that's difficult too, because if a place doesn't have a history of valuing evidence, building in data from the beginning of production, it's a very difficult thing to do after the fact. It's just, I mean, and I think early on, maybe not so much now, I hope understanding is increasing, but early on when data science was just starting to be a thing, people thought, oh yeah, machine learning, you know, wave your wand and magic happens. And what I have to say to that is garbage in, garbage out.
Yeah.
You know? And, you know,
that
it's
tends to be a common theme.
Right. And it's a whole other thing to kind of get the culture of data where the whole team is committed to building strong data streams with good data quality aligned with evidence of growth. And that's tricky.
I mean,
but
we're also amongst this world of like, do degrees potentially matter, or do certifications matter more in a fast moving world? Mm-hmm. So, I mean, we used to kind of mock, or in my mind, we used to think homeschooling was for these different people, really religious or something. Then it turned much more mainstream. Now we're in distance more. Like what other learning models are there? And if we assess that you hit these skill sets, right, you pass the GED or you pass your high school, whether it be from EA's learning module that was a bunch of education or not. Yeah. I mean, because to me, there seems to be this link between funding and, you know, the ability to invest in these technologies, right? I mean, the knowledge is there. You guys are very, very rare and special. You're hard to find, but the knowledge is there. You guys will share that knowledge. The knowledge is out there, but there's no money to employ you and have that kick. You know, if there's 60 courses, you know they could invest in it like there's 60 different games. It just has to be an ROI, and they have to be compensated for that somehow. Like, I'm just wondering how this is all going to roll out, because the outcomes are not that great in the United States right now.
Well, you know, and I'll pass it to KP. I just want to say, in recent work, and I can't name, but probably can't name all the clients, but there are, let's say, large scale MOOC providers who are investing right now in personalization on the platform. And it is a form of this work in a sense. And that's great. And investing in different ways to access content that's engaging and personalized. That's all I think I could say on it. But there's also a sense where back in sort of 2010 and 2012, we saw badging initiatives really come up. And like Mozilla, I don't know, it was like ancient history at this point. But the idea there, you know, like you're saying, Dan, is that it's there's a sense that other kinds of growth experiences and learning experiences are valuable, like micro-credentialing and badging as a way to support trade skills and learning growth. Yeah, I mean, it's a really interesting question. I think that is certainly really valid. I think there's a balance to be struck between trade skill growth and preparation for future learning. You know, I think there's some work that suggests, you know, the jobs that are going to be present in the economy in 10 years don't exist yet, or 80% of the jobs that will be present don't exist. Yeah. So how do we prepare people for that kind of work? And I think the systems thinking, productive failure, learning through, you know, engaging context-based experiences and applying, you know, systems thinking and you know, creative problem solving in these digital spaces is a very important way to develop those.
I wonder, given what we've talked about with data collection, leveraging that data to iterate and improve a learning product, using that to personalize for a learner or a student. In an environment like that, where we're leveraging data, we're leveraging the technology, to as full of an extent as we can. What is then the role of the teacher in a classroom, or does that kind of paradigm as we see it today really start to change?
Teachers still play a huge role to us. We're the way that we're thinking about it is we are a supplemental program or programs, right? So teachers, parents, really adults in a child's life is part of the entire learning ecosystem. Mm-hmm. So the way that we're thinking about it at Age of Learning is that, we produce in the many ways you've said, we use data to drive personalization in the kids' learning games experience. At the same time, we also have to think about parents and teachers as learners just as well. So to the degree we can, and there's a product that we're launching in the upcoming months where there's a large component where we're helping to empower parents to create that home learning environment that's just right in supporting a child's learning. In this case, it's going to be through math. And the same idea is going to be applied to the teachers. How might we help to teachers use the data provided, inform them of how the kids are doing, and to help them, provide appropriate learning experiences for the kids in the classroom as well. I think it's all part of an ecosystem that we have to take into account.
That makes sense. And actually it goes a lot along with some of the most successful like AI and machine learning projects that I've seen are where the approach is not the machine replaces or the technology replaces the person, but it empowers that, your word, or improves what the human doing the work can provide.
Exactly. Yeah, I have to agree with that. I mean, I was a teacher for 10 years before kind of going to grad school and taking a new career direction to help revolutionize assessment in engaging environments. I would have been so thrilled to have something like, an adaptive game-based learning tool in my classroom that could just flag me when students needed some help. Mm-hmm. I would have just done anything for that. Like it's, and I think part of the paradigm that I learned later in teaching was really simulation-based learning and project-based learning. And people talk about PBL or project-based learning, but I think there was something really special about the sense of teacher as facilitator, not teacher as I am the sole enlightened source of all knowledge and you must listen to me while I unscrew your head and pour knowledge in and close the lid. Like it doesn't work. Right. I mean, and that actually, that kind of rigid direct instruction approach widens the achievement gap in many ways, because for students that, where their Maslow's hierarchy of needs, or the sense where basic safety is not met and they're struggling with challenges in their life that other groups of kids don't have, right? Like security and food and, feeling safe. And when students are focused on problem solving in their life, I think that they look for, as all humans do, relevant experiences to develop problem solving skills as they're learning, right? And so that kind of relevance, making education relevant in a general sense of, hey, I'm using this to solve a problem, I'm feeling empowered, I can do this, rather than here's a multiple choice, practice test you have to go memorize. That has just is completely abstracted from any meaningful context, and frankly is not an engaging piece of piece of material, it really, that approach actually will widen the achievement gap if there's a focus on, I'm going to unscrew your head and pour the knowledge in, because it's not relevant to all students, and many students are struggling with things that others in more privileged environments aren't. And we have a responsibility to make education relevant to all students. And this is where this work comes into it. And with simulation-based learning, which is what I had started to do in LAUSD, I was a teacher at a charter school, thanks to a principal that came in and really taught me to do this. I didn't know, I was teaching the way I was taught, which is that direct instruction model. But it really revolutionized my understanding of learning when she came in. She taught us really how to do project-based learning, where we had a simulation. We had simulations in our classroom. We had the styrofoam landform. I had the what looked like the Oregon coast. It made out of styrofoam in the landform, and we built a curriculum around solving problems in context that integrated all the subjects together. And it was a really powerful experience, because I stepped back and became a facilitator. And I watched these students be more engaged than I've ever seen in my life in teaching. And they, our students then were 95% free and reduced lunch, 75% English language learners. This was inner city LA. And I've never seen students so engaged in my life. I mean, it was an incredible experience. And I think we can deliver that kind of relevance, through technology. And I really believe in that. And I think that's something we have a responsibility to do, given the tools that are available to us.
That makes a lot of sense, because it's shifting the motivation to learn from the way that you described it. The motivation is to do an interesting project, which is in and of itself engaging, versus kind of the traditional, here's the data, go do these math problems. The motivation has to be, in those circumstances, purely the desire to learn, which, if you've got other things going on in your life, that might not be the top priority.
Right. Like if it's a forced kind of decontextualized thing that you have to do, like, here, memorize these facts. Like, well, okay, but I actually have real problems I'm dealing with in my life, right? Yeah. As opposed to like, wow, this is an interesting context, and I really get to solve problems in this environment, and it's students investing in their own learning path. That students engaging in, what do I want to do with this? This is a challenge. How do I want to tackle this? It's really a sense of agency in what's going on, and choosing a pathway, and giving a sense of agency and empowerment to make choices and to create things, and to kind of build a path forward. And it's so powerful. And until we are building that and allowing assessment to align with that, and allowing access to students to do that, I think we're not serving all populations and all students the way we need to be.
Can you describe, one thing is, I think you guys are very highly educated and working on these problems, but how big is the, for lack of a better word, the community, the number of professionals, this industry that people are working on, to make this change? And if anyone's interested, how do they get involved?
That's a great question. And in terms of being involved, we mentioned that's a team sport, right? So a lot of it is that this is a shift in the way of thinking of how to build better learning experiences for children. And you can approach it from many different perspectives. Like, you don't necessarily have to be learning and data scientists, although, we have a bias toward that. But, you could also be approaching it from a teacher perspective. We want teachers themselves to be thinking like learning engineers, to think about how do they use data to drive, their teaching experiences, right? And then understanding, of course, the learning sciences would be crucial, but we also want the same kind of thinking from game designers, especially educational game designers, and really any developers, anybody who is interested and invested in this problem, to kind of have that mindset of, applying data and applying research to design. So I think that the field is quite wide.
Yeah, so it's kind of there's not a cohesive center. It's connected by all different passions that coalesce into these things.
Yeah, I mean, there's a few. There's a playful learning. Let's see. I think it's there were some. Okay, so there's some conferences that circle around this work. One of the big ones used to be Games Learning and Society. That's actually where I ended up at graduate school in UW-Madison, where Games Learning and Society organization was centered. That was really dedicated to game-based learning. There's Games for Change, which occurs in New York every year, and I believe there's another one called Playful Learning that brings together professionals that are really focused on this area. Those are three that I can think of that are really big. And so I think, how do you get involved? I think you can approach it from a lot of different perspectives. Those are three kind of event centers that I can think of that pull together people with that common interest. Sorry.
I would also, no, sorry to interrupt. I was just going to mention that it's not like there are, the field is wide and kind of wide ranging, but there are an increasing, effort toward the development of learning engineering as a profession. So,
I like that.
And it really just, a learning engineer is just someone who draws evidence-based information about human development, right, including learning and applying that to results at scale using data.
Using technology, right?
Technology, data, right, especially in a affordable, reliable, data-rich learning environment, right?
Yeah.
Like very specifically, technology-enabled learning environment. So that, as a burgeoning profession and academic discipline, it's definitely one way to get into that.
Yeah, and not everything in learning engineering is about games. It's sort of like learning engineering is a whole field in itself, and games can be a subset of that. Yeah, I mean, I think we're talking here about a big ecosystem. I think, ideally, a game-based learning system could help support learning if a teacher wasn't in the room, but that it's also conducive to working with teachers as facilitators. I mean, I see that as ideal, where somebody can use it sitting in their living room, after dinner at 7 p.m., or they can, have it as part of a formal education program.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it even seems like in that respect, the teacher is a good source of data kind of within the ecosystem as well, because they're on site picking up things that sometimes technology just can't.
Yeah, yes. I mean, and I think when we talk about data and the role of data science, there's a field called educational data mining, which focuses on understanding growth over time, and specifically learning growth, which learning is a latent construct, meaning that you can't directly observe it. You can't ethically open someone's brain and look inside and see the evidence. It doesn't work that way. I mean, and so that's why some kind of assessment and some level is necessary. That's the idea behind it anyway. So to provide artifacts of learning progress. So I think, with that as it is, educational data mining focuses on trying to capture those things, but in a way that leverages data science, including the integration of different data sources, to your point, Tom, where there's qualitative data, there's observational data, behavioral information coming in, even biometric screens, aligned with event stream data. I mean, there's a lot being done in that field. And it's really, to me, the fascinating part about it is that it's a merging of a lot of different sort of areas of expertise to create this sort of unique combining of qualitative, quantitative, observational, biometric ways to really model learning growth. And one of the things that we did do, I'll just mention quickly because I know we're running short on time, but one of the things that we did do at Age of Learning a couple of years ago, this is an example of an application of educational data mining in the game-based learning system to support personalization, is to use something called behavior detection, which in this case was really looking at, in essence, productive failure, which is a concept we've touched on before that's a strength of games. And how do we really understand when that's happening? And so what we did is we looked at this concept of wheel spinning, so sort of somebody working hard or spending a lot of time and effort and really making no progress, versus someone learning at their own pace, where there may be different levels of failure, but students are progressing in the system at their own pace and moving forward and making steady progress. It may not be as fast as the top quartile of students, but what we can't do is set a rule that says, okay, well, if you're learning slowly, that means you need help. Because you can't say that. It's
right.
There's so much, like KP is talking about, learner variability in time on task. It's a very poor predictor of learning on its own. And so using behavior detection to differentiate between what is a positive experience with failure and an initiation of grit, really, versus somebody who really is like struggling and needs help, or they're not going to move forward, and they're frustrated with the system. So we did build a detector of that with wheel spinning. Specifically, we wanted to be able to detect in real time using event stream data when wheel spinning was happening, so that we could intervene there. So that's an example of an application of educational data mining in the game-based learning context. Just wanted to throw that in there since this is a data podcast.
Thank you. And if you think about too that that failure piece, and to your point about grit, when you get into the working world, I think about folks that I've worked with or who work with me, and like when I'm hiring, if I've got somebody who can make mistakes, identify them, work through them, fix them, and then improve, those are incredibly valuable people.
Yeah.
Versus the ones who make mistakes and then come and say, this didn't work. Someone please fix it for me.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's a sense in growth mindset with Carol Dweck's work where failure is not an end. So there's a sense of persistence there that says, all right, well, I hit this roadblock. What does it mean and how can I move around it? As opposed to, oh God, I failed. We're done. Right. And then that's, from her research from the 1980s forward, it really shows that mindset, or that kind of, and really tied to self-efficacy, a sense of, I can do this, I can work through this problem, as opposed to like, oh my God, I can't solve this, I must be dumb. That, working with growth mindset and flexible thinking and self-confidence and self-efficacy is a really important part of being a lifelong learner and being successful. I mean, those things are incredibly powerful. And that's another reason I think that game and simulation-based learning, or even learning in any kind of immersive context-rich environment, can be a very positive experience.
Yeah, and I think it brings it right back to the point that you were making earlier. In a game type environment, that failure is it's safe.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So it encourages learning from it and moving on, which is great.
And I think in specific disciplines like programming, for example, I learned programming later in my educational trajectory, and I initially was extremely frustrated because I thought, I'm not doing this right. I'm not getting an A. When really the paradigm in engineering is you learn through bugs. You learn, like, you literally, like, it's a constant exercise in debugging. And
yeah, exactly right.
And if you don't have a growth mindset, if you feel like, well, I want to get an A on this, you know, this group of coding instructions, or this, you know, this project, and I can't do it. And it, you know, I initially really felt that. It's not like acing a history test, right? So it's really different. And I think growth mindset is going to be especially key to paradigms of professional trajectories and careers moving forward, like engineering, and even learning engineering to a degree overlaps principally with that idea, the flexibility and productive failure. And I think a lot of things that are going to come up for us in terms of future careers are going to depend on that. Essentially that's what creative problem solving is.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, I'll stop philosophizing now.
Well, it definitely has to be flexible, right? And
yes.
That's what this personalization and if we make lots of different adaptive games that adapt to the times as well, because you're right. Yeah. Now we're saying you're going to have 20 careers. And it's radically changing all the time. So how do we learn in that type of world? This is really, and then the gaming culture's in. I mean, I bet you never would have thought when you were doing your education that this cosmic, you know, set of events would be in front of your face right now. That's changing.
Never.
That's going right into what you were talking about, right?
Yeah.
I mean, it's crazy.
Yeah. Yeah, I think it's an incredible opportunity to open up new paradigms of education.
I think it does do a really good job at accelerating the things that we really want to do. And, you know, hey, fantastic opportunity. Now we have a biggest push to do that.
Well, and I think what you'll see is programs that embrace that, embrace these new ideas for learning. The students in those programs are just going to excel past the ones that try to fit a traditional model into this weird situation that we're in right now, with people being so remote, or maybe they're coming into school and sometimes they're not. That if you stick with the traditional, it's going to be I think we're going to see some separation in these classes.
Yeah. And, you know, bless their hearts, teachers are working so hard right now to adjust and to make that transition. And I think really I have a lot of empathy. It must be extremely difficult right now to be a teacher. And I just really have great respect for people who are hanging in there and doing their best to learn to innovate in these times. And I think, you know, whatever we can develop technologically that can help move things forward and be a support is a positive thing.
Yeah, agreed.
Somebody asked earlier if there are evidence or examples of success that, you know, of in terms of school-based implementation right now. And I would say there are great examples all over the place. And so, you know, it's not like it's all a negative image, right? And so one example also is that I've recently learned about the League of Innovative Schools from Digital Promise. It's a national network of, I think, over 100 districts in 34 states. And they specialize and they're known for using, you know, like powerful, smart uses of learning technologies in the classroom. So I have no doubt that we're making headways.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's really interesting. There are some examples of principles even being used, these kinds of principles being used to build schools on their own. So like Quest to Learn schools with Katie Salen is a great example of, the integration of game-based learning principles and technology and, brick and mortar schools. I think we're just going to see a lot more hybrid movement forward.
Yeah.
And I think all of it can play well together. My hope is that it can be very versatile, the technology and the experience, the digital experiences we are providing through the technology. And by we, I mean general innovators in education. I don't mean one company or another, but
sure.
I think moving that forward so that it's flexible, so students can use it again in an informal learning environment where they're not necessarily in classes, or that it's, built to be part of a larger formal experience with the teacher. I think versatility is key, and I think data and the technology really can enable that. And I see that as a vision, that it's flexible, right? Just like the growth mindset that we need to have as learners, including young people, moving forward to keep ourselves relevant and our skills relevant and adapting to the times. Flexibility is the bottom line right now. And fortunately, necessity is the mother of invention.
Yeah,
it's very
agreed.
Exciting. I'm glad that that you guys are sharing this with the world. I think it's very important, and I hope to see that new world faster sooner rather than later.
Yeah, we do too. One last point, and KP, please feel free to jump in. I do want to address that in terms of the ecosystem, we will need to update infrastructures in cities and support for all students in this environment, because the question of equity in education really comes up right now, where some students may have more privacy, more technology, more money, whatever, more at-home support, and others don't. And it's very difficult right now in the early stages of pandemic and school. But that's something that needs to be figured out by, people innovating in the space and local infrastructure and education systems to support. Like, how do we provide safe environments for lower SES students? SES is socioeconomic status students or underserved students, to be able to access technology and have the same focused environment as others. That's something I do want to mention, that as a very real thing that we must take into account as we move forward.
That's such an important point, because if you think about these days, when talking about remote learning can be done so easy, like talking about it can be done so easily.
Yeah.
But you don't think about a kid on one side of town may have a private room,
that's
maybe
right,
a nanny overseeing things,
right,
versus a kid on another side of the town may be in a one-bedroom apartment and not have a distraction-free space to learn from.
I saw a lot of that firsthand.
We're already seeing projections of that gap being an existing gap, right? Already exacerbated by COVID. Like, there are going to be kids who are just going to be severely at a greater disadvantage even than before. And there will be kids that are, that are actually learning a lot more, a lot faster in this environment.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I think some are getting that point. Our neighbors to the north, Canada, said broadband was a fundamental, right. So I hope it sinks in with everyone, because it is, these are enabling layers of learning technology. We have to have access to all of them.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Yeah.
Well, thank you so much. It was mind-blowing yet again.
Thanks for joining us on this episode of All Things Data. If you enjoyed this show and want more, please subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, and others, or via RSS so you'll never miss a show. While you're at it, if you found value in this show, we'd appreciate a rating or a review. Until next time.